man. Governments ain't running things no more. Financial institutions, they controlling the whole scene. Y'all ever hear the World Bank or the IMF? Nah, huh?
The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, are the two most powerful financial institutions in the world. Together, they hold the key to nearly all other sources of money loaned to countries in which over 90% of the planet's population live. The World Bank and IMF originated in the rubble of the Second World War. As the war was ending, Europe was in ruins. Its economy and population shattered.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference.
The conference created a new world economic order by establishing the World Bank and IMF. Each member nation agreed to put a certain amount of money into the bank and IMF. Each member nation votes on which countries will receive loans and under what terms. Voting power is based on the amount of money invested.
So the U.S. has just over 17.5% of the vote, because it's the biggest economy in the world. And Japan has the second most votes, and Germany the third. So in that sense, the U.S. is by far the biggest single voice.
The board of the World Bank is all of the member countries, but with the voting rights assigned basically by the income level of the countries. And so what it means is that the majority power, the decisive power, is held by the rich countries. And it's really the United States. After all, the World Bank is 2 blocks away from the White House and 3 blocks away from the U.S. Treasury, so who do you think runs the show on crucial policy issues?
To change anything in the IMF, you need 80% of the vote. And I think the United States and Western European countries control more than 80% of the vote, which means that you can't change anything in the IMF unless you get their approval.
They were not created by an international body that included the interest of developing countries. Those who control affairs have no interest in whether you are self-sustaining. They are doing their work, their duty.
Originally, the IMF was set up to provide loans to governments in need of short-term cash. The World Bank was set up to provide long-term loans to governments for large-scale projects. Its first task was to provide loans to help rebuild war-torn Western Europe and Japan. When that mission ended in the 1950s, the bank shifted to Third World development.
In the 1960s, many African countries finally gained their political independence. But by then, their economies were totally dependent on the raw materials for which they'd been colonised.
During the 1960s and 70s, many African countries borrowed extensively to import needed goods and to finance development. Then, in the 80s and the 90s, loans were provided with strings attached, often requiring economic and political reforms that place a tremendous burden on the poor. Africa is a continent with vast potential wealth in terms of its people and its natural resources. Yet Africa is the most underdeveloped region of the world. 70% of the people live in rural areas and small villages. Most are farmers, working by hand on small plots of land.
African countries are absolutely buried in unpayable debt. Loans from the IMF, the World Bank, those have been coming for the last 20 years, but the projects that they've supported have not been successful. And sometimes the U.S. was knowingly lending to corrupt dictators as part of a Cold War strategy. Sometimes the World Bank had some scheme that it was trying to promote which didn't work, and the country ended up with a lousy project and with a mountain of debt. So some countries have just accumulated arrears that are mountainous now compared to any possibility to pay.
What happens when a country finds itself so deeply in debt? Well, first of all, the government has to send whatever money it can back to its creditors, which means it can no longer afford to invest much in services for its own people. For example, between 1990 and 1993, Zambia spent $37 million on primary school education and $1.3 billion on the repayment of debt.
Almost always when the IMF is lending to a country, a developing country, we'll be making loans, the World Bank will be making loans, and if it's in the Americas, the InterAmerican Development Bank, which is a regional counterpart of the World Bank, will be making loans.
So, you couldn't get World Bank unless the IMF gave you the bill of health, and you couldn't get IMF unless the World Bank gave you a bill of health, and you couldn't get either unless the InterAmerican Development Bank gave you a clean bill of health. Cross-conditionality. That is when they finally had you by two nooses by the neck.
And because we're working together in that country, we have to make sure we're not working at cross purposes. So we will generally agree.
In dealing with people like the IMF and the World Bank, it's important that you do your homework so well that you don't take to them a plan where they dictate to you what to do.
Haiti is a country where we live with less than $250 per capita. That means if you just follow the structural adjustment program without thinking on the economic situation of the people, you will just collect money to pay the interest of the debt and not investing in people.
Now people are dying everywhere, every day, in homes. They can't afford to go to hospitals. They have no money. Education is for the rich now only. And all this because of this terrible policies. We've never sunk so low in terms of poverty level.
Africa's creditors would have us believe that globalization and the so-called free market economy is the solution to the debt crisis. But the truth is, in Africa today, free markets are really part of the problem.
I think that we reach a stage all over the world where some people have no value. They really have no role to play. From the economic growth point of view, it was as well as that they were dead or never born.
How are we going to uplift the majority of the people, for example, in a country like Zambia, who are at subsistence level, to participate and become part of the modern free market economy? It's okay for those with capital. It's okay for those with technical know-how. They can start and compete. We can talk of globalization. For the indigenous people remain as poor as before. They are not the ones who can buy the company. They are not the ones who are investing. And you say we have now a free market economy. Free market economy for whom?
African people are caught in a trap they did not create and cannot control. The economic policies designed to help them repay their country's debts have instead begun to threaten their very survival. And I can't help but wonder, what hope do Africa's creditors have of ever recouping their loans if Africa's workforce is hungry and sick and uneducated? If we keep on this way, bending poor people's lives to suit our purposes, who will be left to make good on the debt?
Very difficult to say what role they should play. We don't have a political colonialism, we have an economic colonialism. I think that's the easiest way of saying it. And if they can control the shots that far, then are we an independent state?
The world owes Africa a fair deal. We need to be more concerned with people than we are with capital.
At the end of the day, surely Africa has got to be allowed to stand on its own 2 feet. We still continue to receive money. We have to pay back, and it's being borrowed for non-productive purposes. How do you prevent mistakes being made all over again?
What kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where 1/6 of humanity in these impoverished countries have no chance even to see their children grow up healthy?
It's never too late to correct a wrong. It's never. It's never too late to treat a patient, no matter how ill they are. There's always a possibility of survival. Even if that possibility is a tiny fraction, it has to be pursued.